Yeah, no
Maybe,
doubt. No doubt. But give me 1 second here. I'm just gonna pause it for a second and then. All right, Raheem. So Manny Pacquiao, who you covered basically during his whole career since he came to the United States in the late 90s, he's returning July 19th. It's supposed to be official. It's been reported by very reputed people and outlets. July 19th for the WBC welterweight title against champion Mario Barrios here in Vegas. Um, I'll give some of my initial thoughts here. So PBC, who's put on one of my favorite fights of the year, Benavidez Morel. They put on good fights every year, but when this fight was announced, it kind of reminded me earlier in the year when they tried to match Canelo versus Jake Paul. I'm sure they wanted to match Canelo versus Benavidez, and he just wasn't really receptive to that. But my first reaction is, wow, this reeks of creative and intellectual bankruptcy at a time where you have to be more competitive and innovative than ever to try to stop Turkey and Dana from merging and taking it over and everything they got going on in the works. You got to try to put your best foot forward as a competitor. And while both fights would make money, Canelo versus Jake Paul would definitely make money, and that's what it's all about. In terms of long-term sustainable growth, trying to build something that can protect you from the incoming, big tidal wave potentially coming. This is just it's not creative. And I right away I think of Ray Leonard coming back against Hector Camacho, where and Barrios is actually in his prime, unlike Hector Camacho. But this is one comeback that's not going to work out. Ray Leonard at that point in his career couldn't beat anybody. Now and I so the first that's my first reaction. This reminds me of Ray Leonard coming back against Camacho, and that Pacquiao isn't Bernard Hopkins. He's not a heavyweight like George Foreman with one punch eraser power. He's an accumulation knockout artist at his best, had that devastating left hand, but he's a fighter that has relied on his athleticism a lot. And it's amazing that he did what he did against Keith Thurman at about 40 years old, whatever age it was, I think 40, because I thought Keith Thurman would beat him in that fight. And I didn't think a fighter who relies on his twitches and his quickness and his athleticism as much as Pacquiao does could do those kinds of things at that age. So even though my first reaction is it's kind of gross, and why is Manny coming back? Is this to curry political favor, to help a future election? Is it money? Or is it just no, it's not any of those things. He's just in love with the glory and he doesn't want to let it go. Manny Pacquiao loves to be loved and he misses that spotlight. But at the same time, as skeptical as I am, and as much as I want to shoot down the fight a little bit and say this is just another big event, and they're kind of the PBC's gonna have their guys play with each other. Rolly Romero, Mario Barrios, bringing Pacquiao out of retirement. And they're not going to be interested in the sport of the welterweight division because the sport of the welterweight division revolves around Jaron Ennis and Brian Norman. And I don't think they think that Barrios can really be competitive with Ennis in particular. So they're doing something smart. They're doing it's going to make a lot of money, and I get that. But it could end ugly. It could end with one of our favorite fighters of all time, one of the great fighters of all time, getting stopped, getting knocked out against a fighter he would have definitely have beaten his prime. Think of how he dealt. A guy similar to Barrios would have been Jesse Vargas, who Pacquiao handled in 12 rounds 9 years ago. So, but I do want to finish with this, Raheem, before you go. I can't count Manny Pacquiao out. No fighter. He beat all my favorite fighters growing up, from Cotto to De La Hoya to Morales, Barrera, Marquez. I didn't think he was going to beat Keith Thurman, and so Pacquiao, it's hard to put limitations on a man like Manny Pacquiao. But I initially think this is going to be like Ray Leonard coming back against Camacho. It's not going to end well.
It's Ric Flair coming back in the Hulk Hogan era. It's
Rick still had something.
WCW. I think Pacquiao probably still has something.
Uh-huh.
And what I mean by that is not because obviously wrestling is what wrestling is. So, there is less danger in it. But as a kid, it felt dangerous. it felt dangerous as an adult to hear Pacquiao's return. I was so elated when he beat Keith Thurman because what an incredible way for Pacquiao to end his career. Nobody thought he was winning that fight. I was afraid for him in that fight. I thought it was one fight too many. I thought it was too much to bite off, and he definitely wasn't going to be able to chew it. And there he did something that seemed impossible and certainly was incredible. And what a way to finish it. What else do you need to do? What else is it for you to say? Like, that's it, man. That's the thing. Ride off into the sunset and let that be your swan song. And I thought that it would be as time went on and no fight got booked and another year passed. I figured even if it weren't him actually making the decision, circumstances weren't going to create themselves for him to return. And so even if it's against his will, I was happy that that's the way this thing was going to end. I have to change my perspective, though, on old fighters returning in general, because I've been over the years against it. I've called for guys to retire before they wanted to go. I've said to come back, someone should stop these guys. Promoters shouldn't promote the fight. Networks shouldn't show the fight. Sanctioning bodies shouldn't sanction the fight. Commissions shouldn't authorize the fight. Like somebody somewhere along that long procession of people making money at the sport of boxing should stop these guys before it's too late. Just the way you throw in a towel for a fighter if you're in their corner, sometimes you have to protect these guys from themselves. This has been my long-standing position, and it would apply to this Pacquiao return. However, I'm making a 180. You know, what I've seen from Derek Chisora of late, the way even Tyson Fury is playing this retirement game, some of the names you mentioned, like Sugar Ray Leonard and, George Foreman coming back and winning the title at that age, all this stuff, to me, it doesn't justify the danger because of the love I have for the fighters, but also who am I to deny these men their opportunity to live their dream, which is clearly still burning bright inside them. Even if it is for money, they can still do it. If they still think they can do it, who am I to say you can't do it anymore if there's an audience for it? If there's a title available, if you're willing to go through the gym, you're willing to be the one to take the punches, you're willing to risk the later life damage that you could sustain from this fight at this age, then I am in no position to tell you you can't. And I'm going to stop calling on these other mechanisms to stop you. Because you know what? It is a capitalist country that we're in, and it is a capitalist business that boxing is controlled by. And this like moral high ground that I am tried to maintain for these many years in the sport is not supported by anybody but me. And and people like you, when you have the kind of cautionary tale that you just told, but no one's listening to us. And the fighters themselves, more than any of these other elements that I want to stop the fighter, would be like, shut the fuck up. I'm going to do what I want to do. Who are you to tell me now? Right. You made your career off of my career, and now I got to stop my career, and you get to finish yours. You know what I mean? I can hear him. I can hear Pacquiao being like, no, I still got something, So, yeah, it's my new position. If the fighter is committed to it and it can pass the medicals, who are we to say no? And if it does diminish their life 10 years down the line or 5 or the next day, they are the ones who get to decide they want to live with those consequences. Right? Absolutely. I'm not a boxer because when I was young and able and fit, I didn't want to live with the consequences when I was 15. So who am I to say that you can't live with the consequences at 45 or 46? I've never been that guy. I've always weighed boxing as too dangerous compared to what else I could do to make a living. So they clearly have something in them that I never did have, which was the necessity to compete and the love enough to be a fighter to go through what it requires to fight and live with what happens to your body and mind after the fact and what you put at risk. So, yeah, man, he's got a shot at the title. He wants to fight. He believes he can win. Justin Fortune, his trainer, believes he can win. The commission's going to sanction it. let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Maybe he takes Barrios to school. Maybe he's got something more than what we saw in his prime with the twitching and the in and out. And maybe he's learned a way, like a Bernard Hopkins, to evolve his game to still be successful in a way we weren't expecting. Or maybe he gets knocked out of the ring, also like Bernard Hopkins.
Wait, at 51, Bernard still the oldest champ ever at
Yeah,
49. But yeah, but so that
but you never know which night you turn 51,
exactly.
metaphorically.
And we were at that fight in Inglewood when Joe
That's
Smith
right.
knocked him out the ring, and
Special.
yeah, ordinary special.
Special.
I remember.
The greatest press conference ever. And then probably the most dark horse underdog punctuation on a response that I've seen. Like that press conference was so incredible.
The
I was
irony
like out of my
wrapped all
chair, like,
up.
oh. And then he got knocked out. I mean, like, man, that is boxing for you. That contrast is everything.
Well, yeah, the beautiful irony in Bernard, my favorite fighter ever, along with Terrible Morales, having to eat his words, is that no, Bernard, you too are ordinary like everybody else. You are a man. Even you are
Well,
not
you
you are
fought
not
long
actually
enough.
an alien. Every man must meet his day. And that no matter, Father Time, you fought him to the longest battle anyone else has. But even you will succumb to it, to an ordinary man like Joe Smith one day, just because you're
Mm,
still a man, Bernard. You're not actually an alien.
that's the crazy thing. Bernard was on the night and always will be special, but he stayed one fight too long to where
But
ordinary could beat special because Father Time was the determining factor. And that was the lesson I took away. Yeah, you're still special, but your special ass is outside the ring right now because an ordinary fighter is still in his prime. And in boxing, that beats special.
right, and that might be what plays out in this Pacquiao fight. And it's perfect that you bring up Bernard because I remember my reaction that night and talking to Roy about it that night. And everybody's like, wow, how embarrassing. What an awful way to go out. And I think to myself, no, 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 it's really not. This is how it always was with the great fighters.
You're talking to Roy Jones.
Right,
You
Roy
know,
Jones was
later in the years, he was going to get knocked out by ordinary fighters.
over and over again. And that's how Sugar Ray Robinson ended with 19 losses. Muhammad Ali lost his last three fights. This is the real Bushido code. This is the real code of the warrior. When fighters talk about I'll go out on my shield, it used to not just mean in any given fight. It used to just mean period. Like you are gonna have to carry me out of that ring. And we know Pacquiao is that kind of Claude. We know that's who he
Right.
is. He is one of those guys. Maybe the old gunslinger. You started the segment by comparing it to Ric Flair. He had a match with Shawn Michaels where one day Shawn Michaels put him out like Old Yeller, put him out as misery, and did it with love, and respect. The thing is, Barrios has to let his hands go to do that. Barrios, when he fought Gervonta, had a really tough weight cut, but he was tight. He was a little tight in that fight. He's loosened up since, but he got dropped in his last fight against Abel Ramos, a fight he was supposed to be favored in. Pacquiao clearly thinks, this guy is someone he could take advantage of. And Pacquiao in the Ugas fight, through 7 rounds, was fine, actually. He was slightly ahead, I believe, by a point. And then the 8th round, he got old. He just got old. The gas tank went. He couldn't be that constant ball of motion. And once he's not that constant ball of motion, he's much easier to pick off and to handle. But if Pacquiao could have sustained what he had in the first 7 rounds against Ugas, he probably still could have gotten out of there with a win and went on to the Spence fight. If he can sustain against Barrios what he had in the first half against Ugas, and Barrios beat Ugas in the aftermath, then he could pull it off. He could pull it off, but it might just be Barrios has to let his hands go, and if he punch the old man in the face, if you don't punch him in the face, he could start getting funky in there. He could start feeling like himself again, like he's 32, and so we will watch the fight. Obviously, we will all be watching. I'm leaning more towards the Bernard Hopkins Ray Leonard scenario than I am Pacquiao summoning one more Keith Thurman magical night. I think Every great fighter has one last great fight in them. What wasn't that it? Wasn't that had to be it?
That's what I thought.
Fight?
That's what
Yeah,
I thought. That's it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
listen, it doesn't make Ali less special having
Of
lost his
course not.
last three fights. Doesn't make Bernard Hopkins less special having get knocked out the ring. It doesn't make these guys less special. What it reminds you of is what is exceptional about the sport of boxing, which is ordinary can beat special if you are not in the prime of your conditioning, which it is Father Time who decides when that balance of the scale starts to tip towards ordinary, because there's got to be something you can do to make an adjustment to outbox Father Time. That's the adjustment that you have to make later in your career. And then you get to your opponent. And so that is what beat these special fighters on the night. It's the lack of ability to adjust to their current situation. As you said, if he's relying on the young Pacquiao twitches and the ball of energy Pacquiao, he is going to get devastated. If he can make an adjustment and not rely on those elements, but find new tools and new ways to counter what Barrios will do that maybe Barrios hasn't encountered before, because Pacquiao has so much experience as a season and has studied and has figured out what he can do to give this kid a real problem, well, then that is something that Pacquiao will be doing because he is, in fact, special and he'll have a magical night. But that's the only way. That's the only way. Will isn't going to be enough. Spirit isn't going to be enough. Your old abilities aren't going to be enough. Now, as it was from the very beginning, it's about adjustments. The problem is you got to adjust to two things, and the first being Father Time, and the second being your opponent. Your opponent only has one thing to worry about, and that can be the difference.